Number 5. In the Ghetto, Too Political for the King. Did Elvis step too far out of his lane? Was the king of rock and roll supposed to sing about social issues? When Elvis Presley decided to record In the Ghetto in 1969, it marked a dramatic departure from his typical love songs and rock numbers. The song, written by Mac Davis, tells the heartbreaking story of a boy born in the Chicago ghetto who turns to crime and eventually dies violently, continuing a cycle of poverty and violence. It was unlike anything Elvis had ever recorded before. Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, strongly advised against releasing the song. Parker had long steered Elvis away from anything that could be construed as political or controversial. His philosophy was simple: why alienate half your audience by taking a stand on divisive issues? Elvis had built his career on being universally appealing, and Parker wanted to keep it that way. But something about In the Ghetto resonated deeply with Elvis. Perhaps it was his own humble beginnings in Tupelo, Mississippi, where he lived in poverty, not entirely unlike that described in the song. Despite growing up poor and white in the South, Elvis seemed to connect with the song's message about the cycle of poverty that traps generations regardless of race. When the song was released as the lead single from his comeback album, From Elvis in Memphis, it shocked many fans and critics alike. Here was Elvis Presley, known primarily for his hip-shaking and love song singing about inner-city poverty, systemic inequality, and the tragic consequences of social neglect. It was a far cry from Blue Suede Shoes or Love Me Tender. The gamble paid off commercially. In the Ghetto reached #3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of his biggest hits of the late 1960s. But the controversy remained. Conservative fans felt betrayed by what they perceived as Elvis wading into political waters. Some radio stations in more conservative markets were reluctant to play the song frequently. Music critics, many of whom had dismissed Elvis as past his prime and irrelevant in the era of protest songs and socially conscious music, were forced to reconsider their assessment. Here was Elvis, typically seen as safe and commercial, releasing a song that Bob Dylan or Joan Baez might have recorded. Priscilla Presley later revealed that Elvis felt particularly strongly about In the Ghetto and insisted on recording it despite the potential controversy. It was one of the few times he directly challenged Colonel Parker's business instincts. The song remains one of the most unusual entries in Elvis's catalog, a brief moment when the king of rock and roll became a social commentator, using his massive platform to shine a light on issues most of his music had previously ignored. In retrospect, In the Ghetto stands as evidence that Elvis was more aware of the changing musical and social landscape of the late 1960s than many gave him credit for. While the Beatles were experimenting with psychedelia and political messaging, Elvis made his own more subtle shift toward relevance in an era of protest and awareness. Number 4. Suspicious Minds, Stealing from a Rising Star. Was Elvis building his comeback on someone else's potential breakthrough? Did he snatch success from a young artist's grasp? When Elvis recorded Suspicious Minds in 1969, it became one of his signature songs and his last #1 hit in his lifetime. But what many casual fans don't know is that the song had been released just the previous year by its writer, Mark James, whose original version flopped completely. The controversy surrounding Suspicious Minds centers on whether Elvis and his team purposely capitalized on a great but overlooked song, potentially at the expense of James's own recording career. Mark James, born Francis Sambon, had released his original version on Skepta Records in 1968, but despite its quality, the record received little attention and failed to chart. Producer Chips Moman, who had worked with James, brought the song to Elvis during the famous American Sound studio sessions in Memphis. These sessions were crucial for Elvis, representing his determined effort to become relevant again after years of uninspired movie soundtracks. When word got out that Elvis had recorded James's failed single and was planning to release it, some in the music industry raised eyebrows. Was this a case of a fading superstar using his clout to appropriate material from struggling artists? Mark James himself never publicly expressed resentment, and in fact he profited handsomely from Elvis's version through songwriting royalties. But the question lingered in music circles. Was it fair for Elvis to pick up songs that hadn't succeeded for their original artists? The controversy extended to Colonel Parker's infamous deal with producer Chips Moman. Parker attempted to demand that Moman's publishing company turn over a significant percentage of the publishing rights to Elvis's companies, as had been Parker's standard practice with Elvis's recordings. Moman flatly refused, reportedly telling Parker, "I'm not going to give you that. And I'll tell you what else, I'm not going to give you the masters either." This behind-the-scenes battle represented a rare defeat for the controlling colonel. It also highlighted the predatory practices sometimes employed by Elvis's management, practices that smaller artists like Mark James might have been powerless to resist. Elvis's version of Suspicious Minds transformed the song, infusing it with a passionate intensity that made it an instant classic. The iconic false ending and reprise, which Elvis reportedly disliked, added a dramatic touch that helped make the record unforgettable. But some critics at the time wondered if Elvis was simply using his star power to appropriate a song that could have launched James's career had it been given proper promotion in its original form. The practice of established artists covering songs that failed to hit for their original performers was common in the music industry, and still is. But Elvis's status as the biggest solo act in rock history made his song selections subject to greater scrutiny. Was he revitalizing his career by stepping on the potential careers of others? Mark James would go on to write other songs recorded by Elvis, including Always on My Mind, suggesting there were no hard feelings. James later acknowledged that Elvis's recording of his song was the most powerful thing I'd ever heard. The controversy eventually faded, but Suspicious Minds remains an example of how Elvis's enormous influence could completely transform the fortunes of a song and raise questions about the music industry's power dynamics. Number 3. Hound Dog. Cultural appropriation or homage. Did Elvis steal black music? Was his biggest hit an act of cultural theft? When Elvis recorded Hound Dog in 1956, he created one of rock and roll's most iconic moments. However, the controversy surrounding this recording continues to spark debate about race, credit, and cultural appropriation in American music. Hound Dog was originally recorded by Big Mama Thornton, an African-American R&B singer, in 1952. Her version was raw, powerful, and unmistakably sexual in its delivery. Written by Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller, the song was clearly created with Thornton's blues sensibility in mind. It reached #1 on the R&B charts and sold over 500,000 copies, a significant hit in its own right. 4 years later, Elvis recorded his version, which differed substantially from Thornton's original. His rendition was faster, with different lyrics in places, and transformed into a rock and roll song rather than a blues number. Elvis had actually heard the song performed by Freddie Bell and the Bell Boys in Las Vegas. Their comedic version had already altered it from Thornton's blues original. When Elvis's version exploded in popularity, selling over 10 million copies and becoming one of the best-selling singles of all time, questions immediately arose about whether this represented a white artist profiting enormously from black music. This was especially sensitive in the mid-1950s, when racial segregation was still legally enforced throughout much of America. Many black musicians and commentators pointed out that Elvis was part of a pattern where white artists would cover songs originally performed by black artists, often achieving far greater commercial success due to the racial barriers in radio and retail at the time. Some radio stations would not play records by black artists, and many white Americans would not purchase them. Defenders of Elvis noted that he consistently gave credit to his black influences throughout his career, citing artists like Arthur "Big Boy" Crudup, whose "That's All Right" became Elvis's first single. Elvis himself once famously said, "The colored folks been singing and playing it just like I'm doing now, man. For more years than I know, I got it from them." The controversy was further complicated by Elvis's personal admiration for black music. He grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, immersed in gospel and blues, and frequently visited black churches and clubs on Beale Street to listen to music. His sound was genuinely influenced by what he heard there, rather than being a calculated appropriation. Big Mama Thornton reportedly received only $500 for her recording of Hound Dog with no royalties, while Elvis made millions from his version. This stark financial discrepancy highlighted the systemic inequities of the music industry at that time. In discussing this controversy, it's important to note that the fault lay more with industry practices and societal racism than with Elvis personally. Even Little Richard, who had many of his songs successfully covered by white artists, acknowledged this reality once, saying, "They didn't want me to be in the white guy's way. I felt they were pushing me aside." Hound Dog remains emblematic of the complex racial dynamics of early rock and roll. Was Elvis's version cultural appropriation that unfairly profited from black creativity? Or was it a sincere homage that helped introduce black musical styles to white audiences, who might otherwise never have heard them? The debate continues to this day, with music historians offering varying perspectives on Elvis's role in either breaking down or reinforcing racial barriers in American music. The controversy surrounding Hound Dog extends beyond just the recording. Elvis's performance of the song on the Milton Berle Show in June 1956, with his suggestive hip movements, caused a national scandal. While the focus was on the sexuality of his performance, there was also an undercurrent of racial anxiety. Here was a white performer adopting not just black music, but also performance styles associated with black entertainers. Number 2. Are You Lonesome Tonight? An unexpected standards detour. Was Elvis betraying rock and roll? Did his decision to record an old standard signal surrender to conservative forces? When Elvis released Are You Lonesome Tonight in 1960, after returning from military service, many fans and critics were confused and even disappointed. Here was the man who had scandalized America with his hip-shaking rock and roll just a few years earlier, now crooning a pop standard from 1926 that had previously been recorded by artists like Al Jolson and Vaughn Monroe. What made this choice particularly controversial was the timing. Elvis had just completed his military service, during which his manager, Colonel Parker, had carefully worked to reshape his image from rock and roll rebel to all-American boy. Many fans feared that Elvis was being forced to abandon the revolutionary music that had made him famous in favor of safe, parent-friendly pop. The decision to record You Lonesome Tonight wasn't actually Elvis's idea. It was a direct request from Colonel Parker, whose wife, Marie, was fond of the song. This personal favor to Parker's wife would become one of Elvis's biggest hits, reaching #1 on both the pop and R&B charts, and eventually selling over 5 million copies worldwide. Critics at the time were divided. Some praised Elvis's versatility and mature vocal performance, while others saw it as evidence that the establishment had successfully tamed rock and roll's biggest rebel. The spoken word recitation in the middle of the song was particularly surprising, resembling something from an old radio drama more than a rock record. For young fans who had embraced Elvis as a symbol of rebellion against their parents' generation, "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" seemed like a betrayal. Here was their hero, suddenly embracing the kind of music their parents and grandparents listened to. The controversy intensified because this wasn't just any Elvis ballad. It was a deliberate reach back to pre-rock and roll pop music traditions. Elvis actually recorded the song in near total darkness, asking for the lights in the studio to be turned down to create the right mood. The resulting performance was intimate and vulnerable in a way that surprised even some of his critics. Whatever the commercial calculations behind the decision to record it, Elvis's emotional delivery was unquestionably sincere. The controversy around "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" represents a larger tension throughout Elvis's career, the conflict between artistic authenticity and commercial calculation. Colonel Parker consistently pushed Elvis toward the mainstream, believing longevity in show business required broad appeal rather than artistic innovation. Elvis often resisted these pressures, but in the case of "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" he acquiesced to Parker's request. Interestingly, Elvis himself seemed to have an ambivalent relationship with the song throughout his career. During his famous laughing version, recorded "Live in Las Vegas" in 1969, Elvis broke into uncontrollable laughter during the spoken word section, turning the serious love song into an accidental comedy record. This version has become almost as famous as the original, suggesting perhaps that Elvis never took the song quite as seriously as his management intended. The debate over "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" continues to represent the central question of Elvis's post-Army career. Was he still the revolutionary artist who had changed American music forever, or had he become a mainstream entertainer carefully managed to maximize commercial appeal? The answer likely lies somewhere in between, and this song stands at the exact crossroads of that identity crisis. Number 1. Little Less Conversation. Posthumous remixing. Honoring or exploiting. Would Elvis have approved of remixes? Is it right to alter a dead artist's work? When Dutch DJ junkie the 40th, Tom Holkenborg, remixed Elvis's obscure 1968 song, "A Little Less Conversation," in 2002, it created one of the most controversial moments in the posthumous management of Elvis's legacy. The remixed version became a worldwide #1 hit, introducing Elvis to a new generation. But was it a brilliant revitalization or a commercial exploitation of an artist who couldn't consent? The original, "A Little Less Conversation," was a minor track recorded for the film "Live a Little, Love a Little." It reached only #69 on the Billboard charts in 1968 and was largely forgotten among Elvis's vast catalog. Then, 25 years after Elvis's death, Junkie the 40th transformed the song into an electronic dance track, adding beats, loops, and production techniques that didn't exist when Elvis was alive. The Elvis Presley estate managed by Elvis Presley Enterprises, EPE, gave permission for the remix as part of a Nike World Cup advertising campaign. When the remixed version exploded in popularity beyond the commercial, EPE released it as a single where it topped charts in over 20 countries. It gave Elvis his first #1 hit in the UK in 25 years and his first in the US since Suspicious Minds in 1969. Critics of the remix argued that it fundamentally altered Elvis's artistic vision. The original song had been performed with a live band in Elvis's typical late 60s style. The remixed version bore little resemblance to Elvis's actual sound, placing his vocals in an entirely different musical context. Would Elvis, an artist who never even liked performing with pre-recorded backing tracks, have approved of such technological manipulation? Defenders pointed out that Elvis was always at the forefront of using modern technology in his recordings. His producer at RCA, Felton Jarvis, had pioneered overdubbing techniques to enhance Elvis's sound, particularly in the later years. Perhaps, they argued, Elvis would have embraced these new production possibilities had he lived into the era of electronic music. The controversy extended beyond just artistic considerations to financial ones. The massive success of A Little Less Conversation sparked a wave of similar projects, additional remixes, mashups, and repackaged Elvis products aimed at younger consumers. These projects generated millions in revenue for the estate and Sony Music, who control much of Elvis's catalog. Some longtime fans were appalled seeing these remixes as disrespectful to Elvis's musical legacy. Others welcomed the attention these projects brought to Elvis's original work, noting that young fans who discovered Elvis through the remix often explored his authentic recordings afterward. Perhaps the most legitimate criticism concerned the question of consent. Unlike living artists who can choose whether to embrace remix culture, Elvis had no say in how his voice and image would be used decades after his death. The decision rested entirely with business entities that had financial incentives to exploit his continuing commercial appeal. Priscilla Presley, who was instrumental in managing Elvis's estate after his death, defended the remix strategy as a way to keep Elvis culturally relevant. She argued that introducing Elvis to new generations was essential to preserving his legacy, even if that meant presenting his music in forms he never personally created. The A Little Less Conversation controversy represents a question that surrounds many iconic artists who died before the digital age. How should their work be treated in technological contexts they never experienced? Is it more respectful to preserve their art exactly as they created it, or to allow it to evolve with changing tastes and technologies? The remix's success sparked similar projects with other deceased artists, from Notorious B.I.G. to Roy Orbison, making the Elvis remix a pivotal moment in how we treat the artistic legacies of those who are no longer here to guide their own careers. The ethical questions it raised continue to challenge the music industry, fan communities, and the evolving concept of artistic integrity in a world where technology makes almost any manipulation possible. Should we preserve great artists' music exactly as they created it, or allow their work to evolve beyond what they might have imagined? When does homage become exploitation, and who should make these decisions when the artist is no longer able to speak for themselves?